the morning of June the 8th, 2022, and I want to open this meeting, call it to order. Before we start the roll call, to ask you to start the roll call, the official roll call, I want to introduce 4 new members to this board. And when I call your name, I'd like for you to give us a little rundown of what you do and tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from. The first person I'd like to call is Mr. Alvaro. Also, excuse me if I don't pronounce these names just exactly right, because I'm not very good at that. The first person we'd like to talk to is Mr. Alvaro Rosales.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Alvaro Rosales, but everyone calls me Alex. Been working in the oil industry for over 32 years, mostly in the upstream and downstream during my profession. My roles have been generally dealing with safety, environmental compliance, and regulatory matters. I volunteered part to be the board to share my knowledge and expertise, and definitely excited to be part of the board and looking forward to being part of this organization. So thanks. A little bit about myself. Originally, been in Texas for 20 years, but originally I'm from California. So I guess I'm a Texan after 20 years. So.
Thank you very much. Next person I'd like to introduce would be Mr. Mike Pyburn. Mike?
Yes. My name is Mike Pyburn. I have been I'm the owner of Alameda Water Well Service. I've been in the business full-time since 1986. But I'm third generation, so I was following Dad around when I was 10 years old, so I've been in a long time. We're down in the Houston area. We drill in Harris, Fort Bend, Galveston, Brazoria, and all the surrounding counties. We do residential, public, irrigation, commercial, just about any type of water well. And we run 4 rigs and 2 or 3 service crews depending on the time of the year. So we do drilling service, plugging, full service. I've been a member of Texas Groundwater Association for, I guess, 30 plus years. I've been a past president and recently was the chairman of the finance committee and treasurer and still serve on that board. And just a little personal information, I'm 57, got married, been married for almost 34 years now, have 2 kids. My son is in the business as well. So it's been a part of our family for 70, this is our 70th year in business.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Next person I'd like to introduce to you is Mr. Roger Russell.
I'm Roger Russell, owner of Russell Drilling Company in Nacogdoches, Texas. We're mainly a public supply drilling operation and pump operation. I've been in business since 1979. That was shortly after graduating from high school. I am a 5th generation Texan and have lived in the same county since it was Mexico, I guess. So, but anyway, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Roger. Last but not least, we'd like to introduce Mr. Michael Becker.
Hello, everyone. Mike Becker. I'm the owner of Apex Drilling. We're located here in Marble Falls. I've been in business since 1999. We got 1 rig, 3 service trucks. We service mostly just Central Texas. I'm also a licensed PG. I grew up in San Angelo, West Texas, got a degree in geology from Texas Tech. In my earlier career, I worked for Halliburton right out of college, running geophysical logs. Worked around West Texas for 5 years, went overseas to Indonesia for 4 years, and was offered a drilling superintendent job over there, and really got me into the drilling business, and came back and started this business in 1999.
All right, very good. Now, welcome you guys on the board. We look forward to working with y'all in this with our agenda. So now I'd like to call on Delia to make the official roll call, being we're virtual. So we're having to have Delia do you do a official roll call?
Yes, sir. Michael Becker,
Here?
Roger Russell,
Here.
Mike Pyburn,
Here.
Stephen Young,
Here.
Billy Lang,
Here.
Lonnie Ball,
Lonnie Ball.
Alvaro Rosales,
Present.
and Mr. Rusty Gilmore presiding officer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, now that we've got that out of our way, let's go to our first item on the agenda is the virtual meetings training, and we'd like to call Ms. Mary Winston.
Good morning, everyone. This is a virtual meeting, but it's actually our first hybrid meeting. So I feel a little odd. I'm used to seeing everybody in little boxes. After 2 years of just in little boxes, it's good to see actual people. Our IT folks, thank you so much for making this possible because I guess necessity is the motherhood of invention. And we learned things that we could do that maybe we didn't know we could do, and they made this possible for us to have folks who can't make it in or have other things to do. I mean, we're in Austin, and you guys are out there working all over Texas, and thank you for those who were able to make it to the meeting today. So a little bit about protocol and best practices. Our presiding officer has let us know, for those who are online, mute your mics. And unless you want to speak, he will acknowledge you, he will reach out to you, and we'll help with that because we have folks in the room and out of the room. Also, I mentioned it before, this wonderful room is mic'd 120%. So if you're chatting, I've been in meetings and you can hear it. So you may not be able to see who's talking, but it's wonderful to talk about the kids or grandkids, but everybody's gonna hear the wonderful stories about the kids or grandkids. And that kind of helps Derek out with the next open government training, and he'll talk about that. So public comment, that is a time that we allow for folks to come in and make comment. When we're in the virtual world, that is, they come in, there's a way we put them in a waiting room, we take them out. So prior to that, they come into this room. And because we do have this hybrid sort of meeting, we may have folks who come in here and just have something they want to say. That is the public's time. We give them 3 minutes. It's not a time for us to drill them. The only questions that are asked are clarifying questions if something you don't understand or you didn't hear, but it's not up for discussion because it's not noticed. And we have followed the Open Meetings Act and noticed everything that will be discussed in this meeting. If you find something in a comment that you want to address later, then at the bottom of the agenda, we have topics that we can suggest for the next meeting and we can handle it then. So public participation, hybrid, it can be in person, it can also be on the screen. Protocol and best practices, we had a board member of another board and he would always say, you don't want to be the next YouTube sensation. And that was before we got into this world of, is it a pandemic now, an endemic, or whatever we're in? We got a new illness that we're dealing with, right? So you can touch something, reach for something, have a conversation, and they can put that on repeat. So depending on what that is, you don't want that to be you. So we just want everyone to be mindful. Everyone in the meeting, you're accustomed to that. Everyone on screen, you're a little more comfortable because you're in your home, your office, and sometimes we have folks come in and walk around and talk to you, but everyone just keep in mind you are in the meeting and we can see in your room. So I think I've covered everything, just muting mics, being aware, and this is mostly for the people on screen. Welcome, so good to see everyone, and that's my little spiel for today. Derek Burkhalter is virtual, and he's gonna kind of go into some more in depth, and my stuff is like real life stuff. His stuff is formal stuff, formal legal things that you need to know and to conduct the meetings. Welcome to all the new members, and looking forward to this meeting.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for her, for Mary? Okay, then we'll move on to open government training. We'll call who's joining us virtually would be Derek Burkhalter.
Yes, hi, good morning, members. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. My name is Derek Burkhalter. I'm the Assistant General Counsel for TDLR assigned to this program. First, I just want to thank you all for agreeing to volunteer in this position. You're doing a great service to the state of Texas. But it also subjects you to a few laws. And so my job here today is to make you aware of those laws and how to comply with them. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint presentation for you. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint?
No. I don't think so.
Oh, here we go.
Very good, very good. We're
Okay.
good to go.
Okay, good deal. Okay, let's get this started. Okay, so there are three pieces of law that I really need to make you aware of. The first is the Open Meetings Act. The second is the Administrative Procedure Act, and the third is the Public Information Act. And I'm getting a little bit of noisy feedback. I don't know if that's on my end or someone else's. Looks
It was
like
David Gunn. I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
it's me.
Oh, put your phone away, David.
It was on my computer.
Okay, so let's start with the Open Meetings Act. So the purpose of the Texas Open Meetings Act is to ensure open and transparent government. The act requires meetings of governmental bodies to be open to the public and to be preceded by public notice of the time, place, and subject matter of the meeting. And the provisions of the act are mandatory, and they must be liberally construed in favor of open government. So if there's any gray area, we lean towards being more transparent. So there are a few key concepts that we need to cover. The first is the idea of a quorum. So a quorum is a majority of the members of the advisory board, as fixed by rule or statute. So a quorum of a governmental body must meet in order to take an official action. So there has to be a majority present to take any official action. If there's less than a majority, you can still meet, but you can't take any official action or take any votes or anything like that. And that's what that bullet point says. So the second thing is deliberation, and that's basically discussion, and that means a verbal or written exchange among a quorum of a governmental body or between a quorum and another person concerning any issue within the jurisdiction of the governmental body. A meeting occurs anytime a quorum engages in deliberation regarding public business or public policy over which the governmental body has supervision or control, or anytime the body takes formal action. So they have to do it in a meeting, an open public meeting. And the act requires that there be advance notice of the date, time, place, and subject of each meeting held. And that's what you see in our agenda that we provide. And this has to be filed with the Texas Secretary of State at least 7 days before the meeting, and it has to be posted online. The reason the agenda is important is because we can't stray away from that agenda. So we can't really engage in discussions about subjects that are not on the agenda. So if we start to stray afar a little bit, I may kind of intervene and get the group back on track on the agenda. And so you may ask, well, what about social functions, conventions, or workshops, just general things where these members might happen to be together for an industry function? You know, does that mean that they can't do that? And the answer is yes, that they can do that. You just can't discuss board business at these meetings. So you can discuss, you know, general topics, but if it's anything that's specific to this board, just stay away from those discussions when you're all together in a place like that. And so on that note, always be aware of any situation occurring outside of a meeting if a quorum is present. Don't engage in substantive conversations relating to board business when a quorum is involved and you're not part of the meeting. And beware the walking quorum. So what is a walking quorum? So that's basically when you start off in a conversation with less than a quorum, but the conversation expands to more individuals. So even though there are fewer than a quorum that start off in the discussion, whenever you branch out and relay that information to others, you can pull those in essentially and violate the rule, even though you're not all gathered together at once. So for example, you have a 5-member advisory board and 2 members exchange phone calls and emails about an issue. And then later they forward that exchange to another member who wasn't part of the initial conversation. So now they've engaged in a walking quorum because they brought in that third person, and now they have a majority of people talking about that same issue outside of the meeting. So even if you're only talking with less than a quorum about an issue, you want to make sure not to relay that conversation to others or poll other people on the board as to what they think, because even if it's not one conversation, it can be all tied together as if it is one. And so walking quorums can occur in a lot of different contexts, during conference calls, video conferences, hallway discussions, and especially like social media threads like Twitter and Facebook. You just have to remember that, you know, if you post something out there, the other members could read that, and if they respond to it, then you may have created a forum over Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So be very cautious not to post about advisory board business on social media. So just a few best practices. You know, don't meet in small groups and then communicate those discussions to the larger group. Don't send emails or text messages to a quorum, even if you're addressing each email individually. That doesn't matter, it still counts. And like I said, don't create posts on social media about board business where other members could possibly see it. And don't do what we call polling, which is contacting each member individually to find out what they think about an issue, because again, that will all be tied together and seen as a walking quorum. So a few guidelines for open sessions. As I said before, we're limited to discussing the specific items on the agenda. If we stray far, I may have to jump in. During the public comment portion of the meeting, this is where members of the public are given an opportunity to speak. And we usually set like a 3-minute time limit on them. And this is just a time for them to speak. And because what they're going to speak about is not an agenda item, then we can't really engage with them in discussion on their comments. We can ask questions if we don't understand what they're saying, but we can't engage in a back and forth sort of discussion about some random topic that's not on the agenda. And so we want to limit discussions to the agenda items contained on the agenda that we filed. Don't allow discussions to wander off course. And like I said, don't respond or discuss issues that are raised during public comment that are not on the agenda. And if something does come up during the course of the meeting that's not on the agenda, at the end of the meeting, we can designate that subject as something to talk about at the next meeting. So, you know, that's something we take up at the end of the meeting is future topics. So what happens if we violate the Open Meetings Act? So any interested person, including the media, can actually file a lawsuit in court to stop an action that's taken in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So if we violated the act, someone could sue, and essentially they could have a court declare that action void. So if you voted to do something, a member of the public could sue, and a court could say, no, you didn't follow the law, so that vote is void. It's not legally effective. And there are also possible criminal penalties. You know, the law wouldn't have much effect if it didn't have some teeth, you know, some enforcement. And so if you knowingly participate in a walking quorum or participate in a meeting that is closed to the public, you could be exposed to a penalty of up to $500, confinement in jail for up to 6 months, or both. So just something to keep in mind. It has happened. There are a few instances in Texas where people have been subject to prosecution for these violations. So it can happen, but just, you know, be mindful of these laws, and you'll be fine. So a few best practices: avoid communications that involve a quorum of members about official business outside of a properly noticed public meeting. And again, limit your discussion to items on the agenda. Here are a few resources that should be in your materials. So that's the end of the open meetings presentation. I want to stop to see if there are any questions at this point about anything I've just covered.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move right along to the Administrative Procedure Act. And so the purpose of the Administrative Procedure Act is to establish standards for state agencies and provide for public participation and transparency during the rulemaking process. So the Administrative Procedure Act governs how we make our rules for the agency. Now, what is a rule? This is the technical definition of a rule. It's a statement of general applicability made by a state agency, and it does one of these things. It implements policy, interprets policy, or prescribes policy. So really it kind of fills in the gaps of what the statutes, and the statutes are the law that the legislature passes. And sometimes it gives agencies the authority to fill in the gaps of the details for specialized industries like this one, where the legislature can't know everything about that industry. And so the state agency will make rules to govern that industry, and that's part of what you're here to help us do. And so a rule does not include something that's only internal management of the agency. It really only affects whenever the public is affected by some policy. So how we manage our internal matters, we don't have to make rules for, but anything that would affect the public, any interpretation of the law we adopt, we have to do it through rules so that the public is on notice of everything that's required of them. And it can be when we say a rule, we could be talking about a new rule, an amendment to an existing rule, or the repeal of an existing rule. And the sources for rulemaking can come from a lot of different places. Oftentimes, the legislature will make some change to the law, and then we have to change our rules to adapt to that. And so we're still in the midst of doing that for our previous legislative session. Sometimes advisory boards will come up with new ideas for rules. So that's another thing that we need your help for. Sometimes TDLR staff will have some good ideas that make it into rule. And then we also have a 4-year rule review where the law requires us every 4 years to take a look at all of our rules and make sure they're still necessary. And then finally, there's a rule petition, and that's where any interested citizen can ask that we adopt a particular rule. And so let's go into that in a little more detail. So like I said, any interested person can petition TDLR to adopt a rule. And basically an interested person is anyone in Texas, whether you're a resident, whether you're a business entity, or even a governmental subdivision. If you're in Texas, you can do a rule petition. And so if we do receive a rule petition, we have to either deny the petition in writing explaining why, or we have to initiate a rulemaking to adopt that rule. So if we do decide that we want to make a rule, there's a whole process that's laid out by the Administrative Procedure Act. And this chart is going to kind of guide you through that process and just give you an overview of how the whole thing works and how you fit into it. So first we have a rule idea, and staff works on drafting the language of the rule. And then internally, we have to do a lot of analysis of that rule. Like, how would it affect the public? What expenses would it impose on licensees and things like that? How would it affect small communities, rural communities, or small businesses? So there's a really extensive analysis we have to do as far as the fiscal impact. And then we have to send the rule to the governor's office. And the governor's office reviews the rule to see if there's any red flags that they want to talk to us about before we move forward. And then once we clear that hurdle, the blue box is your participation. We would take the rule then to you as the full advisory board and basically have you vote on whether we should go ahead and publish the rule for the public to see. And we do that in a publication called the Texas Register. That's a Texas publication where all state agencies publish their proposed and adopted rules. So once it's published there, it triggers a 30-day public comment period, and anyone can write in and tell us what they think about the rules during that period. And then we have to take all of those public comments, sometimes there's thousands of them, and we have to read through them all and consider them, and we have to write a response to them. And sometimes we change our proposed rule language in response to those comments. Sometimes they make really good points that we want to take into consideration. And so once we've done all that, then we will bring it back to you again as the advisory board, and we'll explain to you all the comments we got. If we think changes should be made, we'll explain what we think those changes would be. And then you will take a vote to decide what to recommend to our commission, because ultimately the commission is who adopts the rules. And so you're only advising the commission as to what to adopt. And so assuming that you vote to have the commission adopt the rules, we would then take the rules to the commission and we would lay it all out, explain to the commission what they are and what your recommendation is. And if the commission votes to adopt the rule, then we would file a second notice in the Texas Register letting the public know that, hey, this has been adopted, and in no less than 20 days, this rule will take effect. And so that's kind of the whole process as it plays out. As you can see with the two blue squares, you get two kind of bites at the apple to look at these publicly and discuss them. And that's why your participation here is so important. And then I also mentioned that we have a required 4-year rule review process. So each of our 37 programs is on its own schedule. We keep track of when every 4 years is. And when a program comes up for rule review, first we have to publish a notice of intent to review, and that's again in the Texas Register. That just lets the public know that we're beginning this process. And the public has 30 days to comment. They can let us know, hey, we think these rules are unnecessary, get rid of them, or I don't like this particular one, or whatever. And then again, we have to review all those comments and make a recommendation to the commission. And the commission reviews everything, and they may choose to re-adopt the rules in full, or we may decide that there need to be some changes, and in which case we would take it to the advisory board and figure out what changes need to be made in response to all those comments. So your program, we went through the rule review in 2021, I believe. We didn't have any major changes recommended. There are a few that we may take a look at when we do our next rules package, but there was nothing kind of immediate that we needed to address right away. So that covers the Administrative Procedure Act and the rulemaking process. Are there any questions about that phase before we move on? Okay, so the final thing to cover is the Public Information Act. Now, sometimes we call this the Open Records Act. I think that's maybe the old term for it. And basically it allows public access to information about the affairs of government and the official acts of public officials and employees. And it makes all documents, records, and other information relating to official state business open to the public with some exceptions. And this includes any electronic communication, so emails or text or on any device if it's connected with official state business. And so it's important to keep in mind, be careful about texting each other about board business or even emailing each other. And if you do that, you might want to keep it in a separate folder aside from the rest of your documents, so that if we do get an open records request, you can easily find out, what records you might have in your personal possession that are relevant. And this is another thing where we have to construe it liberally in favor of granting requests. So if there's any gray area, we lean on the side of providing information. And so if you receive a written request for records or correspondence or anything that looks like a request for state records, please forward that to us as soon as possible, because we have some really short deadlines to respond. We have to respond no later than 10 business days after receiving the request. And so, within those 10 days, we have to gather all the documents that are responsive. We have to edit them. We have to redact them to take out like social security numbers and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very quick timeline. So again, if you get any requests for records, please forward them as soon as you can. There are a few exceptions to things we have to disclose, including like dates of birth, certain email addresses, any vehicle information like license plates or VIN records, credit card numbers or financial records, and then of course medical information. So we go through and we redact all of that, but short of that, everything else is a public record that has to be turned over anytime a member of the public asks for it. And so that is the end of that information and also the end of my presentation. So with that, are there any other or any questions at all that I can answer?
I guess not, Derek. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move along with our meeting now. We'll go to the approval of the minutes, and D has informed me that everyone's received a packet, in their packet, a copy of the minutes from the January 18th, 2019 minutes, and I'm assuming everyone has reviewed those. All right, now what I'd like to do is entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Bill Laney has made the motion to approve the minutes, and Steve Young has seconded that motion. Now I have to have Delia make an official call on that.
Yes, sir. Michael Becker? You're muted, sir. You're still muted.
Sorry. Yeah, yes, I agree. I third that.
Roger Russell?
Yes.
Mike Pyburn?
Yes.
Steve Young?
Yes.
Billy Lane?
Yes.
Lonnie Ball? Alvaro Rosales?
Yes.
And presiding officer, Rusty Gilmore.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, I guess after, next agenda item is public comment, and I understand that we don't have any public comment at this meeting. So we'll go from there to staff reports, and we're gonna call on Lisa Hodek.
Good morning, Chairman and members. I want to welcome the new members to the council, and we greatly appreciate your participation. I am Lisa Hodek, the licensing manager. My report will be brief, as I typically report on the licensing statistics, which are the new licenses issued, renewed licenses issued, total population, and that's for last fiscal year and second quarter for this fiscal year. And on this report, I've included the water well drillers as well as the water well driller and pump installer apprentices. As you can see, the new licenses issued, the apprentices for the second quarter are at 126. Total population is at 602. So this is a smaller program, but it does keep us busy enough. We have new applications coming in and new licenses that are issued. That pretty much concludes my report. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have of me.
You have any questions? Lisa, I guess not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to call virtually the Customer Service Division, Mary Winston.
Good morning again, Mary Winston, TDLR. I'm giving the customer service report for the manager, Don Robinson, who couldn't be here today. So if you have questions, I will have to get back with them to answer those questions. But reading on the screen, and Delia and I are sharing a pair of reading glasses here. So we see the activity that has taken place in customer service from fiscal year, starting in September, is the fiscal year 2021 through August is our report today. And we do have ebbs and flows, and the communications in this program are mostly calls. We do have certain emails. This just gives us a running tally of what customer service is dealing with specific to your program. And again, if you have questions, I'll gladly take those questions and take them back to Dawn, and she can give you a response to those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Move along now to the Enforcement Division. We're gonna call on Aaron Heath.
Hi, my name is Aaron Heath, and I'm a prosecutor with the Enforcement Division. Currently, I'm the only prosecutor assigned to water well cases. It's been a while since our last meeting, and so our staff report has changed considerably. The first part are personnel updates, and there's been a lot of them since the last meeting, so I'll leave it for you to peruse at this time or at a later time. And before we get to the next section, the statistics, I wanted to do a brief refresher on the enforcement process to provide some context to the statistics. Oh, and if you can't hear me, just let me know. So for complaint-based cases, enforcement's involvement begins when a complaint gets filed with our intake section. Intake then determines whether there's enough information to allege a possible violation of our laws or rules. And if so, the intake section opens a case and assigns it to an investigator. The investigator interviews the parties, any possible witnesses, and gathers the relevant evidence. Once the investigator has all of the evidence needed, the investigator will create the investigative report, which is a written summary of the investigation. Once the investigative report is complete, the investigator assigns the case to a prosecutor. The prosecutor then reviews the relevant evidence and applies it to our laws and rules to determine if a violation exists. Generally, the prosecutor has three options. The first is to issue a closing letter, which is done when there's not enough evidence of a violation or the matter has been informally resolved. The next option is to issue a warning letter, and this is done when a violation is found, but it is minor or corrective action has been taken. And then the third option is to issue a notice of alleged violation. We call that an NOAV. And this is a case with a violation of the laws or rules that merits an administrative penalty or sanction. An administrative penalty is a fine, and a sanction is a suspension or revocation. The prosecutor takes into account the seriousness of the violation, the history of past violations, the amount necessary to deter future violations, efforts made to correct the violation, and any other matter that justice may require, and to determine the appropriate level of the administrative penalty and or sanction for the particular violation. The prosecutor follows the parameters set forth in the enforcement plan for the particular program. After issuing a notice of alleged violation, the respondent either does not respond to us and a default order is issued against them. Second, the respondent can settle the case with us and an agreed order is issued. And then third, the respondent requests a hearing to contest the case. This contested case would be a trial-like hearing before the State Office of Administrative Hearings, before an administrative law judge. And the administrative law judge issues a proposal for decision that recommends a specific outcome for the case. That proposal for decision is considered by our commission, who then has the final say as to the outcome of the case, and they issue a commission order. It should be noted that the Enforcement Division prioritizes cases involving consumer harm or threats to public safety, and we often consult with regulatory program management staff for expert guidance on cases. So that's the enforcement process, and let's kind of put this into context for the statistics here. You can see that this first section are the total complaints received, and so those are the complaints that our intake section has received. And below, in the key statistics part, the first five logs are our performance measures, and these are what TDLR submits to the legislature every year as far as how our cases are going. And so the cases opened are the number of cases that intake open from those amount of complaints received. The cases closed are the ones that have been resolved of those cases that have been opened. And then we also report the average time to close in days to the legislature, the percentage of cases resolved within 6 months, and then the percentage of cases resulting in disciplinary action. We included this next item, which we don't report to the legislature, we're not required to, but this is the cases pending at the end of March 2022. We have these two pie charts here to compare the sources of cases opened for fiscal year 2022 through March. And just to give you an idea how the water well program compares to the rest of the agency. Now, the case outcomes below is where the enforcement process that we just went over is really helpful. So explain that the commission order is a case that went to SOA, proposal for decision issued, went before the commission, and it's the order that they imposed on that particular case. And then the default orders is where the respondent didn't respond to our notice of alleged violation. Agreed orders is we came to a resolution with them. So then we have the penalties assessed and penalties collected. We have the licenses that were revoked, suspended, or then either denied or revoked for a criminal history disqualifier. We have the cease and desist orders, and then informally resolved are cases that were issued a closing letter or issued a warning letter. And we also include the top alleged violations at opening. So this is what intake section determined the allegation in the complaint most closely resembled. And then we have what actually happened for the cases. So this is where we actually found violations, the top violations resulting in disciplinary action for fiscal year 2022. And then the next section here are the stats for fiscal year 2021. Before we move on to the case highlights, did you have any questions about the statistics?
I have one question.
Sure.
Could you clarify disciplinary action? Does that include either a fine or a sanction?
Yes. So disciplinary action is fine and or sanction. So we can do a fine, we can do a sanction, or we can do both for any particular case.
And that question was from Mr. Steve Young.
Oh, I'm
from
sorry,
the
I should have
board.
asked. And again, this is Steve Young. For cases pending, that's 70, is that what's the unresolved issue there?
I'm sorry. You
So
said
you
cases
have
pending?
70 cases pending. Is that in a backlog, or is there's some decision waiting to be made for the?
They're at various stages of the enforcement process. So some of them are waiting for intake. These are new complaints that have just been received. So they're waiting for intake to determine whether
Okay.
there's a violation. Some of them are in investigation. So the investigator is actively investigating it. Some of them are waiting for the prosecutor to review it. Some of them have been reviewed and an NOAB has been issued, and we're waiting for either a default, an agreed order, or a commission order for the particular case.
Okay. So, and one last question. So with the default order, you had one, and I guess you assessed a penalty of $2,500 on that default order. Would that be negotiated eventually when that person comes to court? How does that get resolved?
So a default order means they didn't respond to our NOAB, and when that happens, the order is final at this point. So they will be sent to, because it's $2,500, they're likely going to be sent to, if they don't actually respond to TDLR, I don't remember exactly how long ago this case was finalized, but if they don't respond to TDLR within a certain amount of time after the default order is issued, then they will get sent to a debt collection agency to collect that $2,500.
Do they lose their license? Is their license suspended till that's resolved?
This particular individual did not have a license. This was for unlicensed activity.
Thank you.
Aaron, this is Mike Piper, and I just noticed that for the water well drillers, the average time to close the case is over double what the TDLR average is. Just curious, is there any particular reason? Is it just the industry, the reason why it would take so much longer?
Right. So that's for the current fiscal year. The previous fiscal year, it was a little quicker than that. The reason is for a lot of these cases, a lot of the violations that we find are improper well construction. And when that happens, if we just close the case with an NOAB, issued a fine, and moved on, we would then be required to actually open a case against the landowner because it would be considered a deteriorated well. And generally, it's either our RPM, our regulatory program management staff, or the landowner who has filed a complaint with us. And so we don't want to turn around and punish the landowner for filing a legitimate complaint against a driller. And so we work with those drillers and pump installers to go back out there and fix whatever issue they had with the well so that we can resolve the case and not have to open one against the landowner for a deteriorated well. So there's a little bit more back and forth with this program as compared to another program within the agency.
Thank you.
And we also, another issue is we also have fewer criminal history cases compared to the agency in general. You can see from the pie chart, especially for 2022, is 8%, whereas for TDLR is 23%. The criminal history cases go a lot quicker than the rest of the cases do. Any other questions about the statistics? Okay, I'll move on to our case highlights. We try to get a representative sampling of some of the cases that we found a violation for. And so I'll just kind of read them to you a little bit. And forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce all of their names, but I'll try. We have the first case against Morgan Ray Raban Jr. On August 14th, 2019, a default order was entered against the respondent that assessed an administrative penalty of $10,000. The department cited respondent for performing or offering to perform drilling or pump installation without a license. And previously, this respondent's license had been revoked. License had been revoked, and he continued to work after that. Respondent has not paid any of the administrative penalty for this case. For Dean Davenport, on October 21st, 2019, an agreed order was entered against Dean Davenport that assessed an administrative penalty of $1,875. The department cited respondent for failing to properly cement the annular space of a water well, failing to timely submit a well log to the department within 60 days, and failing to include the required department information on all proposals and invoices. And the respondent has paid this administrative penalty for this case. Then we have Jeffrey C. Talley. On November 15th, 2019, a default order was entered against the respondent that assessed an administrative penalty of $3,000. We cited the respondent for failing to properly cement the annular space of a water well and failing to comply with local groundwater conservation district rules or incorporated city ordinances. This particular case was local groundwater conservation district rules. And the respondent has not paid the administrative penalty for this case. The next individual is Cornelio R. Fair. And on August 28, 2020, an agreed order was entered against respondent that assessed an administrative penalty of $750. We cited respondent for performing or offering to perform water well drilling without supervision from a supervising licensee and without authorization in writing from that supervising licensee. And this respondent has paid the administrative penalty in full for the case. And then we have Lewis Cole, DBA Lou Cole Well Services. On March 18th, 2021, an agreed order was entered against respondent that assessed an administrative penalty of $2,500. And the department cited respondent for performing or offering to perform drilling or pump installation without a license, and the administrative penalty has been paid in full for this case. Any questions?
No.
Yes, Aaron,
yes.
Rusty Gilmore, what's the recourse if they don't pay?
So if they don't pay, they get, it depends on the level of the penalty and how many penalties they've had in the past, but generally, if it's under $5,000, they get sent to a debt collector. If it's $5,000 or more, the agency, and this is our general counsel's office, can send the case to the Attorney General's office, and they can do their debt collection over there, which has more teeth than what we can do. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that very much.
Mhm.
Now we'll move along to Education Examination Division, report from them. And I don't want to butcher this name, but we're going to call on John Shieldwater.
Good morning, presiding officer and council members. My name is John Schuldwachter, and I represent the Education Examination Division. Today, I'll present to you this current fiscal year and the last fiscal year for exam statistics for the water well drillers program. You can see this is an overview. This walks us through all the way through the end of April. And of course, you can see there below the statistics for the fiscal year 2021. If we can move on to the next slide there, and this breaks us down a little bit further to the individual license types and by quarter. You can see starting with the first quarter and second and third quarter so far. See the examinations broke on by type, the pass and fail rates, total of test takers, and the pass rate. All the way through, I believe that's May of this year. And lastly, of course, but not least, we move on to the continuing education courses that have been approved. And you can see there the comparison between FY 22 and 21. All right, next slide, please. And of course, as most of you know, we have an exam review committee that's made up of members from this profession, and they routinely review the exam questions. And in this case, the last review was done January of this year. And we really appreciate the input from this board and of course the other members of the exam review committee. We just certainly could not do this without you, and we'd like to thank you also. That concludes my presentation today, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Questions?
I have one question, Steve Young. Are these courses required to actually do this type of work in the field, these certification, like you have a line shaft turbine pump? Does someone have to have this certification from the state to install that and sign that off?
Continuing education courses are required as part of the licensee's requirement to renew their license. I don't have the specifics here in front of me, but that's part of the required training that they're supposed to have before they renew each time.
Okay, so it's just general. They don't need to have a particular course, for instance, to put a line shaft turbine pump in. Is that correct?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not exactly well versed in continuing education, but generally speaking, they're required to have the continuing education courses for their license.
Thank you.
Any other questions? John, I guess that's it.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move along with the Regulatory and Management Division, and David Gunn has joined us in person. David?
That'll be me. Good morning again, new members and previous members. We don't use the word old anymore, because we're all getting there. The Regulatory Program Management had some personnel updates. The department experienced multiple staff changes, beginning with the retirement of Brian Francis and the appointment of Mike Aris-Mendez as the new executive director as of 2022. Charlotte Melder is now the director of RPM, Regulatory Program Management. And Stuart Stenod, he's over there. He's our new manager over our program with the business and consumer safety manager. all since the last advisory board in 2019. Lee Parham, deputy director, retired back in August 31st of 2021. He's out there enjoying the retired life. I keep talking to him. Claire Satterwhite, who used to be with our natural resource specialist, left here to take the job in California. We have a new person, Casey Stevens. She was supposed to be online so I could introduce you, but apparently she's not. She started in February. Oh, there she is.
Hi,
Over
I'm
there in
here.
the corner. Say hi.
Hello.
She started in February 2022. Casey's initial technical review and inspection training has been completed. And she's currently out in the field right now. That's why she's calling in. She's also conducting technical review inspections. And in the future, we will be training her to present continuing education courses on laws and rules, and in an effort to support the industry as well with groundwater districts. And she's already been going by groundwater districts, introducing herself, so they're getting familiar with her out there. For the statistics for our fiscal year 21 and 22 so far, we've done 115 abandoned well inspections, 97 lead investigations. Lead investigations are when people call us and say, I have a problem, and we don't know if they've got a complaint yet, so we'll go out and look at it. 9 consumer complaints so far, 59 random inspections are where we go out, we pull well reports from our system at random, and if they're in the area, they go out and look at the wells, make sure they're in compliance. We've done 4 rig checks. That's where they stop by the rig and see if they're licensed. We've had 16 groundwater conservation district contacts, 5 driller contacts, and 6 CE courses on laws and rules so far this year. And we did 1 camera survey. Our current projects are, the program is currently reviewing the brackish co-mingling study report to present to the co-mingling work group. For fiscal year 21 and 22, staff has attended 7 Texas Groundwater Protection Committee meetings and 16 subcommittees, and they've all been via Teams because of COVID. We have been redesigning our databases and looking for new software or developing new inspection database software. We redesigned our inspection forms, making them fillable so they can type them into an iPad or a compute laptop. And we are currently going through a 4-year rule review, which is what Derek talked about earlier. And we've been working with him on those. Our outreach, I created a letter to reach out to the landowners who convert oil wells submitted on Railroad Commission P13 forms when they're converting them to water well. I informed the landowner, and I also copied the groundwater district, that they need to have a licensed water well driller on site for the conversion. And we, as I said, copy the district. Debbie Farmer, with general manager of the Winter Garden Groundwater Conservation District, has already contacted me and says she really likes the letter and glad to see we're taking an active role. What has changed is the Railroad Commission now has a GIS program where you can find these wells on there and we can get information on who owns them. Adam gave a presentation on well construction and well reporting in Texas for the 12th Harris County OSF webinar series. He presented, taught them how to read our well reports, basically. And that concludes my little thing. If y'all have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
I have one question, David. Steve
Okay.
Young. 4-year rule review, will that be completed or scheduled to be completed?
I'd have to get with Derek on that, but, yeah, we're working on it to get it completed. I think he's about ready. There he is.
Yeah, this is Derek. So we went through the publication and receiving the public comments back in 2021. And so, we've taken all that feedback, and when it comes time to do our next rulemaking, we're going to look at making some of those changes in there. So it's the review has already taken place, but the rulemaking to follow up on that review is currently in process.
Okay, so is that open-ended, or is there actually a regulatory timeline for that has to be completed?
Well, so the commission re-adopted the rules, and that completes the legal requirements
Okay.
for the review. But we can't just re-adopt the rules with amendments to them at that point, because the amendments weren't proposed and published for the public. And so, we've taken that feedback, and we'll have a subsequent rulemaking, but there's no time limit on that rulemaking.
Thank you.
Mhm.
David, just, would it be possible for the new guys, I'm sorry, this is Mike Pyburn, to get an organization chart that shows
Sure.
visually the layout of the department and who plugs in where?
We can
That
send
would
that
be-
to you.
That would be helpful.
We'll get it to you, just because we send most things to the advisory board email. Delia's already making a note, and we'll get that out. We can just send it in general.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? All right, we'll move along to the.
Rusty,
Go ahead.
I was gonna ask, this Bill Langy, now the Casey's gonna be a new investigator, or is,
Yes,
okay. And y'all are back out in the field, Adam?
yes.
This Adam Foster, yes, we're still back out, or we're back out in the field now. We've been out full-time for approximately 4 or 5 months now. So during the pandemic, we still were going out, but it was on a much smaller basis, specifically for consumer complaints. We weren't doing any random inspections. We were doing very little abandoned well inspections. We were only handling cases that were, posing immediate threats to groundwater. So now that the pandemic's relatively over, we're back out in the field full-time.
It's good to know.
Anyone else?
No.
Okay, we're gonna go on to the executive officer report from Mary Winston.
Good morning again, Mary Winston, attorney here at TDLR, and giving the executive review. David started out with those personnel updates, and yes, we welcomed Mike Aris-Mendez as our new executive director. Mike was formerly the chair of the commission, so he sat on one side of the dais. And then he ended up coming on board as staff as the deputy executive director. When Brian Francis retired, he was selected as our new executive director and took that, I think, February 1. So rounding out that executive office, we have Ms. Christina Kaiser, who worked as the director for enforcement for 20 years or more, and she is the senior deputy executive director. Then we have Mr. David Gonzalez, who worked within our RPM division as that director, and he is the other deputy executive director. Prior to that, I think he's been with the agency about 25 years. So rounding out that office, we have Mr. Hemant Macon, who came to us from the podiatry program when the legislature gave us that program a couple of sessions ago. He is now our chief of staff. Sunset and bill implementation update. It's been a while since we kind of got together. So during that time period, we were still working. It was time for our sunset review. The sunset review happens regularly, and it depends on that report when they come around again to see you. During that review, they go into every aspect of how you conduct business as an agency. So they were here for about a year, I guess, a long time, and they went They did a deep dive in every section. They interviewed certain board members. They interviewed commissioners, staff, so forth and so on. We provided records. And the gold standard of you're okay is if they continued you for 12 years. And they continue TDLR for 12 years. And so we will not have to go through another sunset review for another 12 years. So it was a great process. It taught us things that we knew we were doing okay, we can do better. It taught us things that we're doing well and to continue. And it taught us how to kind of use our data in this new age of how things are and how the world is working. So we had what we call our sunset bill, which was in the last legislative session. It was House Bill 1560, and all of that is on our website. So within that bill, we will continue for that 12 years. Polygraph is no longer, we used to regulate the polygraph industry. There is no longer a license that was deregulated. They combined a couple of programs, our barber and cosmetology, combative sports. They eliminated a couple of redundant licenses, and they moved home warranty regulation over to us and changed membership in our driver education and safety board. Now that's overall as the agency. How does this affect water well drillers? What affected water well drillers was this bill also allowed for us to continue to conduct virtual meetings. Initially, our laws and rules didn't allow for that, and we had a sort of governor's executive order that allowed us to continue to work by doing the virtual meetings. Now, we've made that, it's been codified into law, and we are allowed to conduct the meetings virtually. We're here today in a hybrid meeting, but it seems like such a small thing, but it really wasn't, because we weren't allowed to meet but for this order, and we had to continue with rule review, or we had to continue with rule adoption, bill adoption, and that allowed us to continue under that order. Now it's law and we can continue. Currently, we just actually issued our strategic plan, which is on our website. That was June 1. And so I mentioned that because we get into this sort of cycle of how we operate, and every state agency does. So we have a legislative session, we have bill implementation, we have strategic planning. And then next year, we again will go into another legislative session and we'll start the cycle all over. It's a check and balance for the agencies and how we stay up to date and current on what our industry and the citizens of Texas need. And that's where we are right now. So if you have any questions on that, please take a look at our website and our strategic plan. I think it's about 28 pages, but some of that's just introducing staff. It's introducing how we operate, who we are. Even though we all participated in writing it, I have taken to reading it because I just think it's good to do, to know for me internally what's going on, and just for everyone who's affected by any of the industries that TDLR regulates, what we need, what's going on, and how we're regulating, right? So that is the end of A and B of my executive report. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to respond, or if I can't today, I'll get you more information. I do want to cover C before I take any questions, and this is our communication outreach statistic. So this tells us how many views that we get on our website for your web page. We have specific web pages dedicated to each of our professions, and we want to know who's coming to the pages. Are they getting what they need? This is kind of a correlation to our customer service, because if it's on the website, customer service isn't necessarily getting the email, isn't getting the phone call, because they're able to find it. So we're getting almost over 150 views a day, and this is a 6-month snapshot. So 54% of those views are from the computer, 45% from a smartphone, and that small 1% from a tablet. Why are you coming to the website? It's for well construction and plugging specs, exam information, laws and rules, forms and publications, and how to apply for a new water well driller and or pump installer license. So that lets us know that we are providing really good salient information for the public, and it's another one of the things we have in our playbook to just do well for our folks. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, any questions? Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move along to introduce you to James A. Goleb, to present us with a presentation about brackish water and co-mingling study. David? Yeah, James, I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you, and I'd like to thank the council for inviting me to give this presentation on the brackish water co-mingling project that was completed by Interra and contracted by the Texas Water Development Board. This project was completed, as said, by Interra. The project manager was Van Kelly, along with co-authors Steve Young, Clark Griffith, Daniel Lupton, James Pinkard, and I was the TWDB contract manager. I am the manager of the Innovative Water Technologies Department at the Texas Water Development. So next slide, please. So the purpose of this project was to document an assessment of brackish groundwater commingling issues across the state, with a focus on 3 select aquifers and regions, and to inform future policy development regarding the concept of commingling. As David mentioned earlier in the meeting, they're going through a 4-year statute review, and this will be very useful in informing that review process. As part of this project, when we set out a request for qualifications to different contractors to review their applications to do this project, we had 8 individual tasks that were listed to be completed, which included stakeholder outreach, a review of statutes and terminology, a statewide assessment of commingling, as well as assessment of 3 specific aquifers and regions. The final report was published on TWDB's website, is available for viewing, as well as all of the associated GIS data. Next slide, please. This study was initiated by concerns brought up by the Water Well Driller Advisory Council at the Advisory Council Summit on August 17th, 2018. At this meeting, 5 questions were asked and for input, and they included to define groundwater degradation, to identify the amount of time and conditions that must be met for a test well to stay open, what is the minimum well construction standards to produce brackish water, would mixing 20,000 milligrams per liter with 30,000 milligrams per liter brackish water be considered commingling? In other words, would mixing something that is already a very low quality water with something that is even lower quality water, would that be commingling? And to define aquifers and zones. Responses were given both orally and verbally at that meeting, and the meeting is recorded and available on YouTube as like this meeting. Responses for that show that there was more information was needed. And so TDLR became the primary stakeholder for us at the Texas Water Development Board for the development of this project. Next slide, please. As part of this project, 2 stakeholder meetings were conducted. On February 5th, 2020, a public webinar and request for input was conducted. And we asked the public that attended our meeting several different questions. 1, is commingling an issue in your district? 2, does the definition of commingling require modification? 3, if so, how? And how would you define degradation? 4, do you have a physical data to support the presence of commingling in your aquifers? And 5, do you have documented well completion practices in your district causing commingling? The second stakeholder outreach meeting was held on February 22nd, 2021. This was after the report was completed, and this was held with representatives directly from TDLR. What we discovered from asking the public these questions was that many of them had concerns about commingling, that it was of growing concern, but not many of them had direct data to add. So we came up with that was a good indication that more data statewide was needed for this study. When we reviewed statutes and definitions, we focused on statutes from Texas agencies. And while all statutes on this chart were relevant, the statutes from the Texas Administrative Code, Title 16, Part 4, Chapter 76. Next slide, please. Should bring up a small box. There we go. Were the most important. So co-mingling is defined in the Texas Administrative Code as the mixing, mingling, blending, or combining through the borehole casing or annulus or the filter pack of water that differ in chemical quality, which causes quality degradation of any aquifer or zone. According to this definition, there are two specific conditions that must be met for commingling to occur. One, that the mixing occurs between waters of different chemical quality, and two, that the mixing causes degradation of the aquifer zone. Therefore, commingling does not occur when the waters of the same chemical quality mix within a borehole, or when two different water qualities mix within a borehole, but that mixing does not cause degradation. One of the complications with this definition is that definition and differ in chemical quality are not specifically defined in the Texas Administrative Code. Next slide, please. What is defined in the Texas Administrative Code is pollution. Pollution is defined as the alteration of the physical, thermal, chemical, or biological quality of or contamination of any water that renders the water harmful, detrimental, or injurious to humans, animals, vegetation, or property, or to public health, safety, or welfare, or impairs the usefulness or the public enjoyment of the water for any reasonable purpose. We can look at this to see that Texas Administrative Code Title 16 is intended to prevent the contamination of usable water with a human or environmental health risk. And mixing of groundwaters that maintains use may not be considered degradation and therefore commingling. Next slide, please. So to begin this study, we wanted to think about what could cause commingling and then develop a model for how commingling occurs before we looked at either an individual aquifer system or a statewide assessment. So what could cause commingling? Commingling could be caused by either well drilling, completion, or well operations. Well drilling, commingling could occur by drilling through different quality zones, through different zones of hydraulic head, or creation of conduits between aquifers and zones by drilling. It could be caused by well completion, by the selection of intervals for screening, by the selection of intervals for casing, and it could also be caused by well operations, depending on the pumping schedule, whether or not a well is pumping or not, or if there is enough monitoring of flow and water quality at that well. Next slide, please. When we looked at a general framework, physical framework for commingling, we looked at several different characteristics of an aquifer and what to look for. This included the stratification of water quality, whether or not there was if water became lower quality as you drill deeper, if there were geologic aquitards between zones of different water quality, what the different vertical hydraulic head gradients could be, what well completions were, such as if there were screens intersecting undesirable water, and what the operations of wells were. On the right-hand side of the PowerPoint slide, you can see a stratigraphic column from the Gulf Coast Aquifer system with water quality in different colors. In general, total dissolved solids increases with depth. However, as with most aquifers, you can see that it's not quite that simple. So this becomes a very site-specific and very complex question to look into. Next slide, please. So this diagram of the conceptual model that was developed for this report shows an aquifer with 3 different zones, each with a different hydraulic head. On the left is one well that is completed and screened across all 3 zones and has a composite hydraulic head. And on the right, each aquifer zone is screened individually and has differing hydraulic head. In this example, the zones lower down have a higher hydraulic head. So next slide, please. In this example, when the cross-completed well is running, it will produce a mixture of all 3 different zones. If you know the total dissolved solids and the transmissivity of each individual zone, you can calculate what that total dissolved solid of the mixed water will be using the equation above. In this particular instance, the likelihood of commingling is very low. The water that is getting mixed and pulled into the borehole is being produced, and therefore there's very little risk that there's going to be any mixture of the lower quality zones, say from zone 3, into any of the other zones. Next slide, please. However, when the well is turned off, this changes. Water from potentially lower zones with higher hydraulic head have the potential to enter the borehole casing or annulus, and then because of the differing hydraulic head, may flow into the other different zones. If this action causes degradation of the aquifer, this would be considered commingling. Next slide, please. So commingling is mixing groundwater within a well between zones such that one zone degrades another aquifer zone. It does not apply to mixing that occurs at the wellhead from pumping. Commingling could occur under non-pumping and pumping conditions. However, the potential is far greater under non-pumping conditions. However, the data required to delineate the potential for commingling within an individual well is rarely collected, such as zonal water quality and zonal flow rates. Next slide, please. So using that physical framework, the study goes into looking at the select aquifers and regions and looking at how we can interpolate and get a grasp of the potential for commingling across these aquifers. 3 specific areas to assess were specified by TDLR, and they included the Gulf Coast Aquifer System, the Eagleford Region, and the Trans-Pecos Region. Primarily because most of these are areas that have multiple hydraulic heads, that have cross-completed wells, and that commingling is a known issue for. These are very large areas that cover a large portion of the state. And so our objective was to characterize the potential for commingling both within and between aquifers of this region. Next slide, please. So the approach the report uses was to develop a database with the necessary data for looking at the potential for commingling. There were well completions were collected with an emphasis on identifying any multi-aquifer completions. Maximum head differences between aquifers at the locations of these cross-completed wells was also collected, and the water quality within the aquifers, including the amount of brackish water was collected. All right, next slide, please. The database, which is available for download, however, it is a very large database, so on the TWDB project website, it just has a link to email me and I can send you a copy of that database. But the report is available for download. Included well and screen information. Included over 100,000 wells for the Gulf Coast, over 35,000 wells for the Eagleford, and over 5,000 for the Trans-Pecos. The aquifer structure and hydraulic heads were from the TWDB's groundwater availability models, and the water quality data was from the TWDB Brackish Resources Aquifer Characterization System and groundwater databases, as well as other information that Interra had or was able to acquire. Next slide, please. The first of the three regions was the Gulf Coast Aquifer System. This region had the most available data and was has the most specific site-specific examples in the report. The Gulf Coast Aquifer System is a complex system. Sea level changes created cyclic deposits of clay and sandstone. That tend to thicken toward the coast. It contains several nested and stacked flow regimes and vertical hydraulic gradients that are created under natural conditions. The strat column on the right is probably familiar with anyone that drilled out in the area, and this creates, in general, a very high likelihood of cross completions in wells that cross complete different aquifers or even different zones of aquifers that have varying different water quality. Next slide, please. So this map shows the northern Gulf Coast Aquifer region. On the left is a map of wells that are cross-completed between one or more aquifers. On the right shows vertical hydraulic head differences between the Chico aquifer and any aquifer that it is cross-completed with. The triangles that point downward show a downward hydraulic head difference, and the triangles that point upward show an upward hydraulic head difference. The size of the triangle shows the range of the difference. This is a little bit difficult to look at directly on the map, but again, the database is available. But this shows that there are many cross-completed wells within the Gulf Coast region, and many of them contain vertical hydraulic head differences that are screened. So next slide, please. The Eagleford region, slides are out of order, but that's okay, is defined by the presence of the Eagleford group, which is a well-known hydrocarbon play. This contains aquifers of the Texas Upper Coastal Plain, such as the Carrizo Wilcox, Sparta, Queen City, Yegwo-Jackson, and a couple others. These units are generally fluvial deltaic. In general, this means that a lot of the sandstones are very complex. They're interbedded with clays. They may or may not be, depending on the formation, laterally continuous. So again, you get a very complex system that may, in general, water quality decreases with depth. But on the left, there is a correlated strat column. You can see that it is far more complicated than just it gets higher TDS with depth. So the Eagleford region was another one that is, again, very complicated to look at because of this. However, there is relatively good data within the region. Next slide, please. This map shows the lower Eagleford area that was investigated. And of course, there are many more maps and much more data that's available in the report, much more that I can go through in a presentation here. But this shows cross-completed wells on the left, and then on the right shows cross-completed wells with the Carrizo Aquifer in the southern portion of the Eagleford. Next slide, please. Finally, the Trans-Pecos region. This was the most structurally and geologically complex region of the three areas we looked at. The aquifers here range in composition from siliciclastic to carbonates to the igneous aquifer. So unlike the previous two regions, which, while they contain different aquifers and different formations, were somewhat related depositionally, this contains much more variation across the entire area. But many of the aquifers are still in direct contact and prone to being commingled and being co-completed. The Dockham is an excellent example that is commonly cross-completed. Next slide, please. Again, this map shows cross-completed wells down in the southern region of the Trans-Pecos, and then the hydraulic head differences. Here you can see that there are different zones with different, depending on if the vertical hydraulic gradient is potentially going upward or downward. I guess that's the easier way to put that. But there's much more variation. Although there are fewer wells in this area, it was harder to get individual case studies. This does show that there is potential for commingling within the area. Next slide, please. So the main takeaways, and all the available data is available in the report, but the main takeaways from the individual studies was that all three regions have the potential for commingling to occur. They have vertical hydraulic head differences. They have wells that are screened across multiple aquifers or zones. And there is a potential for a low quality water or degradation of that water. So there is a potential for, if there is water that becomes commingled, that it will reduce its reasonable usefulness. It would require more treatment. It would possibly require different uses. So the locations, yes. So the case studies are provided with each individual zone in the report to provide well-specific evidence for a potential commingling and the mechanisms that may cause it. And this can provide insight into some of the detailed characterization that is required to evaluate commingling on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So after we looked at these three regions and had a better idea of what the statute was regarding commingling, we used that gained knowledge to create a statewide ranking of commingling for each of the Texas major and minor aquifers. Each aquifer was given a normalized score that ranged from 0 to 1, 1 being a very high potential for commingling and 0 being very low. The criteria for this ranking included the availability of brackish water, the brackish water groundwater productivity, the range of salinity classes that were present within the aquifer, the stratification of the aquifer, historical vertical head differences within the aquifer, and the amount of cross aquifer completions that were present. On the right shows the highest ranking aquifers, the Gulf Coast and the Dockham being the highest, that ranks with the potential for commingling. Again, this shows potential for commingling. This is a desktop study with a very large scale. But the purpose of this was to look at which aquifers have this potential, what the mechanisms were, and where future drillers or future concern about commingling should be focused. Next slide, please. So there are two specific conditions that must be met for commingling to occur. And mixing occurs between waters of different chemical quality, and that mixing causes degradation to an aquifer zone. This study focuses primarily on brackish water, total dissolved solids. This was contracted by the Brackish Water Resources Group at Texas Water Development Board. The report does go into some detail about other contaminants, radionuclides, but what we had the most information for was brackish groundwater, which tended to be of primary concern. groundwater flow can occur within a borehole under non-pumping conditions if the hydraulic head within the aquifers or zones is co-completed, if they have different hydraulic heads. That was the main method we looked at to look at commingling across different aquifers. When we started this project, I remember discussing with Van and Steve how we were going to look at it, and that was one of the primary pieces of information that we felt was important. Stratification of water quality commonly occurs in aquifers, and it's very common in several different aquifers, such as the Gulf Coast. This increases the potential for commingling, especially if there are different zones of water quality that, so you move from a fresh water to brackish water, saline water, the potential for commingling then exists. The conditions that could lead to commingling are very common in Texas aquifers, and future characterization may need to characterize it. As we move toward the future and looking at different water resources, I know at the Texas Water Development Board, the characterization of brackish groundwater production zones is a major concern. The use of brackish water, the use of groundwater desalination may become more useful in the future. The population of Texas is growing, but the volume of water kept in surface water reservoirs or streams is not. And so with more demand on water, more water resources are going to be investigated. So there's a big push toward looking into brackish water resources. And as we look toward brackish water resources, the need to characterize that and what data would need to be collected becomes a major issue. So additional data, there are several suggestions within the report for future data collection. The primary one is zonal hydraulic head data. This is relatively expensive compared to most other water well characterization studies. However, perhaps in the future, especially with groundwater production, desalination, for the protection of fresh water, for the protection of groundwater usefulness, it may become necessary. Next slide. There, as I mentioned before, this is the report, and it's enormous. It's 300 some pages. Is available for download on TWDB's website. All the geodatabase and all of the associated data is also available. My email is available, and I can provide that to you as a OneDrive link from the Texas Water Development Board if you would like to look at it. Of course, the recording for the Water Well Drillers Advisory Council Summit is also on YouTube, and the responses from that report are available on YouTube as well, and for the new council members, if you want to go back and see that meeting. Next slide. So this is my contact information. Again, I'm the manager of the Innovative Water Technologies Department. We cover aquifer storage and recovery, desalination, and water reuse at the Texas Water Development Board. I'm going to take questions, of course, after the presentation, but if you have any other additional information, you can email me there or give me a call at my office phone number. I provided this PowerPoint to David Gunn. He may be able to provide this to you. And I will also take questions, and if it's a very difficult question, I will then politely forward you on to Van or Steve. But I will answer any questions that I can. Next slide, please. That brings us to any questions. And again, I've already talked to Van about this as the project manager. If there are any questions that you have that I can't answer, I will forward you on to him. And so he's aware that I will do that.
James,
Yes.
Roger Russell. What type of whales were you normally encountering in this study that had the co-mingling, where you had vastly different types of water?
There were several, I mean, a lot of water wells, will, especially older wells, I believe, would cross complete water. Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Especially older wells would do screens across different zones, different, salinities. That is, not, newer wells tend not to do that as much, but a lot of older wells did. They would go and get as much water. For example, we just did a study in the upper coastal plains, the Carrizo Aquifer, and in the Wilcox, you can screen across, go from slightly saline to moderately saline, in one screen fairly easily.
Did you see any of the, you had freshwater zones and brackish water zones co-mingling?
Yeah, there were cases of that. Particularly in the Gulf Coast as well. There were cases of that, and in the Trans-Pecos, the Dockham was very common for that, because you would go through the Dockham down to the, not the Igneous, but the, I forget.
Santa Rosa.
Thank you. Down to the Santa Rosa, and between those two, you'd go from fresh to brackish.
Okay. Oh, for the, so, well, this is not a fair question for you. What I was gonna comment.
I've been asked unfair questions before.
Say, I'm an East Texas driller, and I have no, knowledge of that area, say out in West Texas, and I just go out there drilling.
Okay.
I would need to do some research before I drill. Wouldn't you think so?
I would think so, yes.
So, also, in your study, you were just including, wells, the screened area, correct?
Yes.
You weren't, considering wells that weren't properly grouted? Or
I don't think we had really robust information on that. It was, the database includes the screened area.
And so the only real way to tell if a well's got 800 parts per million dissolved solids, in contrast to a zone that may have 4,000 parts per million, there's going to need to be some testing.
Yes.
Both chemically and hydraulically, correct?
That's right.
That's all.
It seems like I'm sorry. My name is Mike Pyburn. It seems like the study, as you said, tended to focus more on brackish water commingling.
That's correct.
And, one of the things that kind of precipitated this discussion, at least with some of the associations that we're involved with, was the fact that you can, number one, you can get, even in the freshwater zone, you can get commingling of very different qualities of freshwater that have a drastic impact on their usability, or the amount of treatment that it takes to make them potable.
Right.
And a lot of the concern was, I think Roger just alluded to it, was commingling because of improper grouting of the casing. So that's not really addressed in this report. It's primarily commingling inside the casing through the screened intervals, correct?
That's correct. That's the primary basis for the geodatabase and the model. We touch upon potential well construction in the report. There are some case studies that show that. But for the broad overall, we focused on the screen areas because that's the information we had. You know, for this report, we do touch on for other water quality data, so such as, you know, not brackish water, but different water qualities. The same mechanisms do apply. We do talk about that report does touch on that. But what considerations to look for, but for the GEA database focused on screen intervals and brackish water. And part of that had to do with making it that, you know, a single report. This was the first attempt at doing anything statewide and cohesive about commingling that we could see. There has been, you know, cases of talking about commingling within a well casing, but nothing has looked at the state or at the potential across the state, or looked at the mechanisms in a unified way, as well as how the statutes relate to it. So this was very much the first step going toward that. So I would still say there's a lot of work to be done. We do address that in the report, but this was our first way of making a first step, I think, toward that goal. And the focusing on brackish water was what we could see as a way to do that. And again, if Steve has anything else to add to that, but that would be my take on it.
And I drill completely in the Gulf. I need to say my name. Yes, okay. Mike Piper for the fourth time. We drill in the Gulf Coast Aquifer.
Yes.
And we, you know, that we have a rule, you know, that says that if you drill through waters of different chemical quality, those wells have to be submitted back from the production zone to the surface.
Right.
And that's been a real problem in our area. And I don't see that this report, because you get co-mingling, it's not completed properly, you get co-mingling because of the difference in head pressure. Some of the same things you're talking about through the screen, you can get outside the screen.
That's right.
And so it's a real problem because there are lots of improperly completed wells. And so I just want to know, is that something that this group would go back and possibly look at and give direction or some guidance as to how that can be solved?
Well, for this report, again, was contracted by Intera, and that contract is over. So a new report would need to be made. It is definitely of interest. The Brackish Water Resources Group is developing a new set of contract reports to be putting out in the future. They have been debating what studies to be done. Another commingling study has been floated. I don't know if that will be in the next package of contracts, but it is something that a future study on it could potentially be. I don't know that they're going to be sending out a new set of contracts to look at. I think by the end of summer was the last I heard. However, I don't know if it will be included. I could ask. I would have to get back to you on that if it is, but it is something that the group would be interested in, yes.
I think we have, Mike Piper again, I think we have a rule that practically is difficult to enforce.
Yes.
And there needs to be more data behind it that would give staff the ability to enforce it. And it's a big problem, and I will tell you, it is a big problem in the Gulf Coast Aquifer, in the freshwater zone, that needs to be addressed. And so I would just encourage you, or whatever the process is, that is another area that I think would merit going back and investigating further. Because practically, we have a rule, as you said, where the rule, where the terminology is not, it's vague.
Yeah.
It's pretty general, and so it makes it difficult to enforce. And I think that would be something that would be good to go back and look at.
Mr. Piper, Mary Winston, TDLR.
Yes.
I'm going to, if it pleases our presiding officer, let Mr. Piper have this final word, just because we do have just a couple more things that we want to get to on the agenda, and that we do have Mr. Golab's information. David has a copy of the study. You can always reach out. He's always here and ready to talk about water wells and drilling and pump installing. And so if that's okay with you, Mr. Gilmore, we will kind of wrap up and release Mr. Golab from this table.
All right.
And we can just wrap this up because we just have a couple more items. And if we want to get more information, then we definitely have information at the end of his study where we can reach. And of course, there's always data.
Thank you, Jenny. It was a good report.
Thank you.
Very good, very much. So we go ahead and wrap up. We'll go ahead and do, we want to get some guidance from Derek Burkhalter on assigning work groups.
Yes, hi, Derek Burkhalter here. So the idea behind work groups is that we can have you all meet in smaller groups to discuss issues or possible rule drafts, and then take the work of that work group and then present that to the larger advisory board. And so what we typically do is create work groups, smaller groups that align with our divisions, like an education work group or like a standard of care work group, and then assign less than a quorum of you to each group. And so that's how we typically do it. And so because we have some new members, we need to assign people to the appropriate work groups. And it's totally the presiding officer's discretion as far as who to appoint to what work group. But of course, you can also take volunteers, just however is most convenient. And do we know what were the current groups that we have, David? Do you know that?
David Gunn, we only have one work group right now, and that's the Co-Mingling. And that's the one we need to get back up started.
Okay, so we needed to assign someone to the Co-Mingling work group.
That's correct.
And then
Because we had members that left that were on that work group.
okay, and then we probably want like an enforcement work group, an education work group, and then we usually do like a licensing work group, and then like a standard of practice work group.
And Derek, I'm gonna help you out just a little bit, just to remind everyone that we need less than a quorum. And if we can, Del, do we have a copy of these work groups that we can see who we have currently on them? It's been a minute. So, because we may have had people leave the other work groups as well, because we've lost some members or we've changed members. But we can begin with the Co-Mingling work group.
We only have.
Okay, it looks like we have, Derek, at this time, we just want to do the one work group because we need to assess the other work groups. Currently, we just have one that's active, and that was the Co-Mingling work group. And we can put the rest on hold because right now, they're not gonna meet. And so until our next kind of get together, we'll get those active. So just the Co-Mingling for today?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. And that is the assignment that's at the will of the presiding officer. And we just need 4 members.
Okay. You know, I look at this board and you see the vast amount of knowledge and experience in doing this, and it's really not very hard to do to pick out some guys' opinions, but it is kind of also, it's unbelievable how much knowledge is right here. And I first of all, I would like, this Rusty Gilmore, I would like to be part of that committee, if I give mine.
You can definitely
Okay.
appoint yourself.
And I'd like to appoint myself and Mike Piper,
Okay.
Roger Russell, Bill Langy.
Okay. And that is the one group we're gonna do today. Derek, so made your job a little easy? Until the next time.
I always appreciate that.
And so actually, Presiding Officer Gilmore, that takes us to the next agenda item, which is J.
Recommendations, change items, next council.
We'll leave it. I think Diggy was going to go ahead and, poll the committee for the next meeting. I think Diggy's gonna set that up.
So I'm gonna, Mary Winston, TDLR again, I'm gonna pipe in one more time. Typically, we get to the end of these meetings and we say, what are your recommendations? And everyone has a handful of knowledge just from this one report, right? So if we don't have recommendations at this time from the board, from the council, that is okay. Because as Derek said earlier, he is working on that rule review, it's in another stage. So that will likely be an agenda item at our next meeting. We could possibly have another work group report from this newly assembled co-mingling committee. These are just ideas. If the council or council members come up with, and please just be council members because we don't want any quorums, but if someone has an idea for recommendation for an agenda item for our next meeting, please send an email to our advisory boards that Delia does. We all get it actually, but Delia heads that box for you all, and we can get that in consideration for our next meeting. And so if there's anything on that agenda item now, and we'll wait to see if anyone has anything until that next meeting, we could then, it's time to discuss date and time, location. We talked about how we have this new time frame or this new ability to do virtual and or hybrid. So we know the location will be online and here. But date and time at this time, because we don't have any items that, unless you want to correct me, or Derek, unless you have some time frames that we need to meet at this time that you want to get out.
This is Derek. I think maybe let's wait and see what the work group does and what kind of actions we're looking at, and then we can maybe poll everyone once we have a better idea of where we stand.
So Delia is going to poll the council and check on time and availability for that. And that brings us to the end of the agenda for this meeting. And that's all I'm in the power, I have the power to do. Mr. Gilmore has the power to.
Well, it's almost high noon. I think we'll just adjourn this meeting.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming and being with us online, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.